Grief is real, big, better shared. The podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear.
I'm Kevin Lee, President and CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is real, big, better shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who make the heroic decision to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are driven by compassion for these families and continue to walk with them through their grief journey. Mid-America Transplant provides several programs to help families memorialize their loved one, but we believe that some of the best support can be provided by a grief center. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance at life. For more information about being a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Hello, welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, the podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear. I'm Angela Hamblin-Kelly, the administrator of the Baptist Centers for Good Grief, and we're so glad that you are tuning in today. If this is your first time checking out our podcast, please know that we have Season 1 available wherever you get your podcast. In Season 1, there's a lot of great content about grief in general, about spouse loss, men in grief, and important things to know about childhood and adolescent grief. So make sure you go back and catch up on those episodes. With Season 2, we've heard from you and we listened to you, and we're going to focus more on some specific topics in a very short format. Just as a reminder, the Baptist Centers for Good Grief has been providing grief care for over 25 years. We've grown from a children's grief camp to a program with 3 comprehensive grief centers in Tennessee and Arkansas. We started this podcast because grief is the most universal experience there is. Again, this is the podcast everyone needs to hear because grief involves pain and vulnerability, which is also why this is the podcast nobody wants to hear. So I sit here today as a grief counselor, but I'm also a griever. So in our podcast, we hope to honestly look at grief and discuss the heart and head tug of war from an evidence-based grief counseling perspective, but also the very real-life perspective as well. So today we're going to spend some time on a topic that we have heard from a lot of different listeners that they would like us to talk more about, and that's grief being an end, but also a beginning. It's a really hard concept to wrap our brains around. And so I'm so grateful today that one of our grief counselors, Erin, is here with us. So thank you, Erin, for being here today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
So usually when people bring this topic up, it's with a little bit of disgust. Like, what is this business about it being an end and a beginning? I don't want this. I didn't ask for this. I don't want a new beginning is pretty much what they're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I like things the way they were.
Right.
And
right.
I would like to go back to that, please.
Right. And I think that comes from our culture and the way that, this person that we love has died, and therefore the relationship is over, and it's all over, it's all done, and you have to move on, and that is so painful.
Absolutely.
And it's a misconception.
It is, because people don't understand the enduring nature of grief. I was just talking to a client yesterday about how it's been over a year and people in her life have this expectation of like, aren't you over that yet? And it's very painful to her. And, we talked about how people just have trouble understanding that concept if they haven't been through it themselves.
Absolutely. I think that comes down to it a lot, that sometimes those messages are coming from people who just do not know. They haven't experienced it. And it can be one of the most painful things to hear as a griever is like this forced sense of finality. When what we do is help people with the work of the physical presence of that person is gone. It is. But what is the connection, the relationship that remains, and the fact that a connection and a relationship can actually remain?
Exactly. And it can and it will.
Exactly.
Because there isn't really anything that you can do to make your grief go away and therefore make that relationship, end. Like you said, the finality. There isn't finality. That person and your memories and the love that you have for them is going to endure. So that's what we have to learn to do, is to carry that love forward, carry that connection forward. Even though their physical presence isn't here. So that's very difficult because that's what we're used to interacting with, is their physical presence. So how do we have a relationship with someone who isn't here anymore?
Right, right. So going from that physical presence to more of a spiritual connection, a connection through love.
Yes.
Because love always remains. The memories remain. And that's why it is important for grievers to do memory work, spend time with their memories, sharing those stories with people. And we want people who are supporting grievers to know how important it is to hear those stories. Even if it's the 10th time someone's telling you, it's because I'm working on, this change of physical presence to this new relationship I have with the person I love who died.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I have to work with clients on who is a safe person to share with and who isn't, because I will have clients say, well, these people always shut me down. So, yeah, those are people that you may not want to share with if they're going to make you feel bad about sharing. So look for those people in your life who have shown that they are open and willing to hear those stories and to support you in that. It's really important to find those people.
Absolutely. And I think some of this new beginning part is about when we lose a loved one, we lose that physical presence, as we said, but we also lose a part of ourselves, our security, and our meaning. And when we're grieving, part of the grief work is developing this new identity without my loved one here. And that is a new beginning. And I would give anything if somebody would give us a roadmap so that we could figure it out, but we don't get that. And that takes work and time and supportive people to find that. So that's where that new beginning comes in this too. You can't be who you were before when your loved one was still alive. So there is this sense of, well, who am I? I've had many clients say it's like I'm almost starting over to figure out who I am.
Absolutely. And I love what you said there about, you're living life without that loved one by your side like they were before. And you have to figure out how to navigate life without their support, without that safety net. And I talk to so many clients who are very unsure of themselves and very, having to figure out how to make decisions without having this person to bounce ideas off of, or, afraid they're going to make a mistake, feeling like their safety net isn't there anymore. And that, that really wrecks your confidence in yourself as a capable person. And so you're having to learn again to trust yourself and that you can make decisions, but that's going to take time.
And there can be victories along the way. You just reminded me of a client that I worked with years ago, and her husband died. She had 3 small children, and he was very handy. And her van door broke. And it was one of those sliding doors. And she took it to a repair shop that it was an astronomical quote. She could not afford that.
Right.
She went home. She was very upset about it, very just it really stirred up her grief that here I am alone and I have to do all these things. Well, she watched some YouTube videos, and she worked out in her garage one day when the kids were at school, and she fixed that.
I love that.
And when she came in for her next session, she was just almost like 30 times larger. I mean, she just was like, I did this. And you maybe remember, I'll never forget this. She said, I don't like who I am now. I don't want to be who I am now. I want my husband back. But I did it and I am proud of myself.
Yes.
And so that is part of that too. Again, we would all like to go back and be who we were. But figuring out who am I now without this person's physical presence? What are some of the things that I can do? Who can help me do those things? But then also being okay to celebrate the victories when they happen.
Yes, absolutely. I love those YouTube sessions
Yes.
where people come in and they have figured out
Yes.
how to do something on their own that normally their loved one would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's very empowering.
Yes. And I'm just reminded of a quote Alan Wolfelt says that, in doing grief work, we have to say hello before we can say goodbye. And so we do have to spend time with the end of the physical presence, but it's also okay to say hello to this this newness ahead of us. And we don't take that lightly. That's hard and that takes time. It may take the support of a counselor to do that. But that is part of the necessary grief work, is working to figure out who I am now.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to get support for this part of the journey because it can be very lonely. And if you can find support, if you can reach out to a counselor or find a good grief group, just having people around you so you know you're not alone can be very comforting.
Absolutely. Well, Erin, thank you for just being here with me today and talking about this. This is a topic, again, a lot of people want to hear more about, and I know that we talk about with so many clients individually that it is an ending, but grief is also a beginning. But again, it's a beginning we didn't ask for, but it is a reality.
It is, yes. Well, thanks for having me.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. But like we've said, grief demands attention and care. It also needs support and patience. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love. You are not alone. The world is full of many grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can check out our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief. You can check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, know that you can reach out and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in learning more about. You're welcome to email me at angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. That's angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.